But for him who is happy with the self alone, who is content with the self, and who is gratified with the self, for him no duty exists. Such a person has nothing to gain in this world by acting, and he has nothing to lose if he does not act. He is not dependent on anyone for anything. Senses, mind, and intellect are said to be the places where desire resides. And this desire slowly removes wisdom from the man and makes him delusional, says Shri Krishna Bhagavan.
A Sankarshan Joshi trip.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita series. This is a Sankarshan Joshi trip podcast, and I'm your host, Sankarshan Joshi. Chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, talks about the right understanding that we need to have and the right outlook towards life and mortality and action. This is chapter 3. It is Karma Yoga, the yoga of action. So recently, one thing my wife told me that just struck a chord and that just stayed in my head, which was, she told me, when you are reading Bhagavad Gita, think of yourself as Arjuna and think that you are asking the question, seeking answer from the divine energy. And ever since I had this conscious thought, the experience and outlook has changed completely. So I'm saying this at the start of the episode because I also wish that you guys listen to this episode thinking that you are Arjuna and asking these questions. Every single person is going through something or the other in their life, right? And they are on their path. And that path has a lot of hurdles in it. And reading the Gita, thinking that I am Arjuna and thinking that I am asking these questions, the answer that you get feels like Krishna is giving that answer to you. So, without any ado, let's start the episode. The chapter starts out with Arjuna asking Krishna, if you consider having the right understanding superior to action, then why are you urging me to do this fearful action? So at this stage, Arjuna is still contemplating to pick up the weapon and wage the war. And Arjuna continues saying, with your unclear words, you seem to confuse me, and I am already confused. So just tell me one thing through which I can attain the Supreme God. To that, Shri Krishna Bhagavan says, in this world, there are twofold paths that are taught by me in the past. One is the path of knowledge and the other is the path of action. Shri Krishna then continues saying, actionlessness or freedom from action is not attained by giving up on action. Just by renouncing action, you don't reach perfection. Shri Krishna then continues saying, no one is really inactive because human is compelled to act by the qualities of nature. And this statement stands true biologically and psychologically, right? So those two aspects drive our human beings to act. And a person who controls his physical body and lets his mind wander over the sense objects is said to be a hypocrite and is delusional. Shri Krishna Bhagavan then says, he who controls his senses and employs his physical body in Karma Yoga without having any attachment is said to excel. Perform your duty because action is better than inaction. And you can't even preserve this life in your body without acting. Worldly people are karmically bounded to act unless it is performed as a yagna or divine act. Therefore, O son of Kunti, let your action be free from attachment and perform as yagna. Shri Krishna then says, in the beginning, Brahma, Prajapati, or the creative consciousness of God, created human beings as a yagna and said, by this yagna you shall propagate and that shall be your cow of plenty. Previously, I had mentioned yagna as a divine act, right? But the literal meaning of yagna is a fire offering. So in Indian history, we have seen people be seated in front of a fire and perform a puja, right? So that that entire process is called yagna. So that's the literal meaning of yagna. And at the end of the yagna, they offer something to the god and they put few things in the fire, metaphorically representing that we are offering that to the god. And the belief is the god receives whatever the devotee is offering, and then they will bless the person who has performed the yagna. So this is the literal meaning of yagna. Shri Krishna Bhagavan then continues saying, nourish the god through yagna and let God nourish you, and by nourishing one another you shall attain the highest good. So let me tell you guys my perception and how I understood the above line said by Sri Krishna Bhagavan and what I think yagna is. So one key aspect that we need to notice, so while I was defining the literal definition of yagna, right, one key aspect that we need to notice is the offering at the end of the yagna. So after performing the puja in front of the fire, at last they offer a few things in the fire, metaphorically representing they're offering that to God, right? And I think that is yagna. So you can offer anything to God. It could be your devotion, it could be you meditating upon God, or it could be your action. So when you act without expecting the fruit of the action, you are truly offering that to God or the universe, right? Because you don't have an expectation of what you want. You truly did your job and you offered it to the God. And you let the God or the universe decide the output for you. And this, to me, is yagna or divine act. And through this process, we can nourish one another. We nourish the God or the universe, and the universe would nourish us. So this would create synergy. Shri Krishna Bhagavan then says, nourished by yagna or divine sacrifice, the gods will bestow on you all the enjoyments you desire. Shri Krishna then adds, he who enjoys his gifts without offering it to the one who gave it to you is truly a thief. He who is righteous eat what is left after offering, and he who does that is absolved of all the sins. But he who cooks for himself and eats alone will eat sin, says Sri Krishna Bhagavan. And I really like the way how the sentences are structured. Like it's poetry. Krishna then adds that creatures are the product of food. Food is the product of rain. Rain is the product of yagna, and yagna is the product of action. Action is the product of Vedas or knowledge. Vedas are from the God, the imperishable God. Hence, the all-pervading Brahman, the eternal God, is in yagna or the divine act or the divine sacrifice. So, previously, while I was reading, it said that food is a product of rain, but rain is the product of yagna. So this is a very interesting statement, right? So I had a conversation about this with my dad as well. So centuries ago, people performed yagnas, the pujas, for the welfare of the people in the kingdom. So if there is a famine, the king would perform a yagna, offering that yagna to God and hoping and praying for rain, and hence it would rain. So back in the days, this was a very literal concept. So people were very elevated in their spiritual state. So a lot of miraculous things happened back in the day, and I am nobody to deny or dismiss them because I don't know anything. But that is a concept that we all read in our history, right? So that is there even in Ramayana or Mahabharata. There is a lot of yagnas that happen, and literally people would do yagna so that it would rain, and once people perform yagna, it would rain. So this is the literal translation of that statement that rain are the product of yajna. But when we look at it metaphorically, right, in the way that how I explained what yajna is earlier, where we are offering things to God, and if we look at it from that perspective, rain is a metaphorical representation of the gift or the output that we receive from universe or God. Sri Krishna then adds, he who does not follow this wheel keep rotating, and they live in iniquity or wickedness. They are contented and consumed in their senses, and they live in vain. But for him who is happy with the self alone, who is content with the self, and who is gratified with the self, for him no duty exists. Such a person has nothing to gain in this world by acting, and he has nothing to lose if he does not act. He is not dependent on anyone for anything, says Sri Krishna. Therefore, perform actions without any attachment, and by doing so you will attain the highest good. By the path of right action alone, Janaka and people like him attained perfection. Therefore, perform actions as an example to mankind. So, here Sri Krishna gives example of Janaka, right? He says, by the path of right action alone, people like Janaka attained perfection. So, who was Janaka? Janaka was a king, and he was the father of Mother Sita, right? Who is the beloved wife of Sri Ram. So, Janaka Maharaja, who was a king, but he lived as a yogi. He was a man who realized God, who performed all the state duties perfectly, but was not attached to any of the material pleasures. So Krishna here gives example of such a man, and he asks us to live like him and set example to mankind. Sri Krishna then says, perform actions as an example to mankind, because whatever a great man does, others imitate. Whatever standard he sets, others follow. For me, O Arjuna, there is no compelled duty in these three worlds, and there is nothing unattained for me to attain. Yet I do act, says Sri Krishna. If I ever cease to perform my actions, then others would imitate my way. If I ever stop performing actions, then the world would fall in ruin. I would cause confusion and bring destruction to people, says Krishna. Krishna, the God, is or the universal energy, or the energy that just manifests this entire universe and all the things that happens in it, right? So, if a part of that energy or if the part of that cycle is disturbed, then everything would be ruined, right? So let me give you guys an example. So let's take honeybee. So scientifically it's said that if honeybee stop doing their work and if honeybee goes extinct, then within a fraction of days or weeks, the entire humanity would come to an end, right? So if universe or a part of the universe decides to not exist, then the entire universe would collapse, right? Sri Krishna then continues saying, ignorant people act with attachment to the action, but the wise should act without being attached to the action as an example to those people. The wise should not unsettle the minds of ignorant people, and they should not try to convince the ignorant people to act without attachment. Instead, they should perform their action as yoga and perform without attachment, and their action should inspire the ignorant people to follow their own duty. All actions are performed by the qualities of nature, and he who thinks that I am the doer is consumed by ego and is delusional, says Sri Krishna. However, he who understands the modes of nature and senses that makes a man act knows that it is the senses that are acting to the modes of the nature, but he is unattached to them. Those who are deluded by the qualities of nature become attached to the actions produced by those qualities of nature. But he who knows the truth should not try to unsettle the minds of ignorant people who sees only the part and not the whole. Fight, therefore, surrendering all your actions to me without any ego or expectations, with your mind focused on your true self, the eternal self, and be free from this fever of doubt. Those who constantly follow this teaching of mine with firm faith without making unnecessary objections will be free from all karma or action. But those who reject and despise this teaching of mine senselessly and think that is wisdom is said to be doomed. Sri Krishna then says, even the wise men act according to the tendencies of their own nature, and every single creature on this planet act according to nature. So what can suppression result? Each sense has its own attraction and repulsion. So one should not get succumbed to them, because this is the hurdle to one's path of realizing God. Shri Krishna then says, it is better to follow one's own dharma or swadharma, no matter how imperfect it is, than following someone else's dharma. It is better to die following one's own dharma, because paradharma is fought with fear and danger. Arjuna then asks Krishna, what is it that drives a man to sin against his will, as if he is under compulsion? Sri Krishna then says, it is the desire and anger born from the rajas quality of nature, and one should know that this is their enemy. So Krishna here says that anger and desire is born from the rajas quality, right? So rajas is one of the three qualities of nature, one being sattva or sattvic, one being the rajas and other being the tamas quality. So sattvic is the upward or the spiritual tendency. So thus nature is always associated with goodness, peace, and it could also be represented with the color white. Rajas guna is always associated with the worldly pleasures such as lust, taste, etc. And this is represented by the color red. Tamas guna is also associated with the worldly pleasures like the lust and pleasure to the senses. But this is a fully negative tendency. It is also associated with violence and unkindness. So if it had to be represented with color, black would be the color that it would represent. Shri Krishna then says, as fire is concealed with smoke and mirror is covered with dust, as embryo is covered with womb, this teaching of mine is concealed with desire. Knowledge is darkened, O son of Kunti, by this eternal enemy of truth seekers in the form of desire, which is insatiable. Senses, mind, and intellect are said to be the places where desire resides. And this desire slowly removes wisdom from the man and makes him delusional, says Sri Krishna Bhagavan. Therefore, Arjuna, control your senses first, then you will destroy desire, which is the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Senses are said to be superior. Mind is said to be superior to senses. Intellect is said to be superior to mind. But the real self, the eternal self, is said to be superior than intellect. O Arjuna, control yourself by the real self and destroy this enemy who is hard to conquer, wearing the form of desire, says Sri Krishna Bhagavan. And that is the end of chapter 3. I really enjoyed studying chapter 3 because it focuses and talks about desire, and as Krishna says, that is a biggest enemy of human beings, right? The desire can take up any form, and Krishna also mentions that your mind, intellect and senses, desire will be residing in these places, and slowly it will eliminate wisdom. So in this day and age, there are so many things that we could desire as human beings. So reading this chapter and understanding it was a very eye-opener in a lot of ways. I hope that this episode had impact on you guys too. So thank you for tuning in and thank you so much for listening. This podcast is available on video as well as audio. If you want the video version, head to YouTube. If you want to listen to me on audio streaming platforms, head to Spotify, JioSaavn, Ghana, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. Thank you. Until next time, stay tuned.
A Sankarshan Joshi trip.